history is the epic of how people try to keep away from hunger, how people try to feed themselves. So we are pleasing both hunger and appetite. Hello, I'm Felice Prudente Sta, a cultural worker for over 50 years and a pioneer in Philippine food history research for the periods of the colonial era. Welcome, come inside. My interest in Filipino food writing started when I was in my teenage years. I was reading foreign material and I said, if they can talk about their food, its history, can we do the same for Filipino food? After many years, I realized that no one was really studying the history of Filipino food. No one was looking into how the food developed and if the food could say anything about who the Filipino is. So I really decided it was time that I do something about it. If you had to paint the broad lines of the history of Filipino food, what would that look like? I see recurring patterns, having studied Philippine food history, patterns from before that keep repeating themselves today. So maybe it's also a bit like a spiral. Our food is the product of many things happening simultaneously and then affecting our food supply, our food products, and our attitudes about food. People say that pre-colonial Philippines was already involved in trade with our neighboring countries. What are your thoughts on this? The influences on Filipino food have never stopped, even during the prehistoric period. The question is probably to what strength, to what intensity was that influence, and were the influences all over the archipelago? Transformations in Filipino food were not uniform all over the archipelago. They were not simultaneous all over the archipelago, and they were not interpreted in identical manners all over the Philippines. The interaction that took place certainly was from our Austronesian migrations from the Taiwanese area down. We have traders coming in from the Asian mainland, from China, from India. We have traders also coming from the Srivijaya and the other empires in the south. All of this is simultaneous. Here, we don't have in the Philippines any one strong political state. We have sultanates or Raja states or datuships, and in different levels of development. As to influences, yes, they never stopped. As to what kind of influences and were they very strong, it varies. Why is our cuisine not as well documented as, say, Vietnamese or Thai cuisine? The cultures that have highly documented food records tend to be those that had very strong kings, very strong priests. And so they were documenting food to see if they had enough to feed themselves. They were documenting food because it was tithing. They also wanted to see what gifts of food were given to them. So they needed to have very specific records. Especially if you had a large empire, you wanted to know what was coming in from different parts of your empire. We did not have that. We were writing on perishable material. We were writing on leaves, and very little has been found written on metal. What we have at the moment are snippets in terms of prehistory. Even food history. What I have are snippets. We try to string them together in some sort of a chronology and look into what was going on simultaneously. We're trying to put these vignettes in context. And it's only once we have more information that we can actually see how people influenced what they were eating and what was available for food, how that in turn influenced people. For instance, the Philippine National Museum has shown us that once upon a time we were eating rhinoceros. That is the oldest meat that we have documented. Then we also know that through the Austronesian migration, there was the salting of fish in Batanes. We have dates for that. We know that they were salting fish up north. We're not yet sure. Were they salting fish as well moving downwards? Our rice culture, for instance, rice at one point was not an everyday food. And there was a point when it was considered a ritual food and an expensive food. And it is supposed to have been through the Austronesian migration that rice culture reached us. We find that our word bigas, for instance in Luzon, has an Austronesian etymology. Look at our word lasa. The etymology of lasa is rasa, which is Sanskrit. So there was definitely some form of mixing of words, of attitudes, and probably of different foods. But again, to say beyond a doubt to what extent, we're not yet ready. If we go back a few hundred years, is there such a thing as Filipino cuisine, or did every region cook its own way? First of all, the Filipino, the term Filipino, only began during the Spanish era. And it didn't mean Indio. It meant the Spanish who were born in Filipinas. At what point were non-Filipinos beginning to start associating certain foods with Filipinos? Of course, initially, there were the colonists, the missionaries, because they had to brief other foreigners who were coming, well, this is the kind of food you're going to find. This is what the Filipinos are eating. These are the ingredients that are growing here, and this is what we, the Spanish, are doing with those ingredients. So there's that kind of an interest, and so those become foods of the colony called Filipinas. And there were different foods for the colonists, foods for the natives, food for the Chinese, food for different peoples around the country, because the terrain was different. But what I think becomes very interesting is that by the 19th century, when there were Filipinos going overseas, they were bringing their food with them. They were cooking their food wherever they were. What strikes me is when Jose Rizal and Maximo Viola visited Fernando Blumentritt. When they got there, what did he feed them? He fed them Filipino food. He fed them kare-kare, pancit, arroz a la Valenciana, all these Filipino foods, which to Blumentritt meant Filipino food. And then later, when we had the very important banquet in Malolos, we had Filipino food incorporated into this continental menu, and it carried Filipino names. So we had oysters, but they became Manila oysters. So again, we were moving our food into the level of food diplomacy. In international cookbooks that were published in the United States, the Philippines is included. What's interesting are the recipes that they chose among many Filipino recipes. Why were those the ones chosen? Again, you would have adobo. Leche flan was very important. So little by little, we were becoming associated with certain foods. Foreigners were beginning to see, oh, this is Filipino cuisine. How do we want our food to be known? I think we want Filipino food to be liked. We're a people that want to be likable. We want to share our food. And this goes back probably to that idea of naya-naya. And naya-naya is very, very possibly a pre-colonial term out of the Visayas. It means to be happy. To be happy, why? Because we're making other people happy. We're making our guests happy by caring for them, by feeding them, by giving them gifts. So there's this reciprocity through food. We not only like to eat, we like to cook and serve our food to others. What are your thoughts on the idea of authenticity? Is there really only one way to make a dish? First of all, we need to understand that it is inherent in Philippine food culture that Filipinos don't like to get bored with their food. Filipinos are very susceptible to wanting to try something new. When there's a foreign food that comes in, oh, we want to try it. If there's a foreign ingredient, we want to try it. That's us. So we like diversity. Authenticity may not take the same interpretation in the Philippines as it would in a culture where, let's say, there's an emperor, and if you don't make the food of the emperor exactly the way the emperor wants it, he'll cut off your head. Okay? We don't come from that type of a culture. Ritual food, for instance. Ritual food has to be cooked exactly the same way, presented exactly the same way, and if it isn't, the tradition will say, not only will the one making the offering suffer bad luck, but so will the community. So there is this important necessity for it to be exact. It's not in the culture. We prepare the offerings in a traditional manner, but we will not get, it seems, very upset if today's doesn't look like yesterday's. Every recipe has certain required ingredients, or it wouldn't be that dish. So there's a given structure to a dish. For instance, if it's adobo, we know there has to be vinegar. Now, what else will go in there? That has varied. But the point is, and it doesn't even need to be vinegar. It just needs to be a souring liquid. I mean, I've come across cooking with the juice of the suha, for instance. Sinigang, for instance, is another one. We want it to be sourish. Again, okay, how authentic would it be? In the Visayas, it is mildly sourish. In the Tagalog area, it is strongly sourish. It is not sour, it is sourish. So, what is authentic? What becomes authentic is the fact that it is sourish and having varying degrees. And again, souring agents. We have so many of them. So again, it is authentic sinigang, but it has so many variations. They're all authentic. They're all real. Through our various waves of colonization, did some of our food ingredients disappear? There was no colonial effort to force any Filipino to eat any food or to drink any beverage. During festivals, they encouraged us to eat lechon because for them, lechon had significance. It meant you were Christian. It meant you were neither Jewish nor Muslim. So we were already eating pork, and we continued to eat pork as a result. If there was any enforcement of food, it was during the Spanish period when you have to understand the Philippines was an uncultivated wilderness. They moved people from the coastal and riverine communities, they moved them into new towns, the parish, pueblo. The new residents needed to know how to plant in their backyard so that they would always have food. And at the same time, they also had to plant some items which were considered tribute. When new botanicals like the cacao plant or the coffee plant or the peppercorn plant, when those things were starting to be planted for commercial purposes, people were also requested to plant them in their backyard. The equivalent of the LGU had a quota to fulfill. During the American period, again, they never forced us to eat anything. They encouraged us to understand the new science of nutrition. They backed it up by encouraging families to plant nutritious foods. But other than that, in terms of what to eat, what not to eat, we were never forced. What was the most surprising discovery you've made in your research? I've made many discoveries in food history that surprised me and that are surprising other people. For instance, it's important to be aware of what is not there when you're doing a chronology. I was reading and I always came across dayap, all way back in maybe the 1600s. And then only dayap. 1800s, only dayap for cooking. And what happened to calamansi? When I got to the early 20th century, I go, lo and behold, now there's calamansi. Because it is a hybrid that was made in a Philippine laboratory. The Filipino food scientists took the calamunding and crossed it with several different species of Chinese oranges and local oranges. And they found one combination that seemed to work. Now, the calamunding, if you look at the scientific name, it means thornless. Calamunding has no thorns. But then, remember, the calamansi tree has thorns. It needs the thorns to protect it from all these enemies that will try to climb the tree and destroy the new fruit. So they put together the thornless calamunding, which was small, fragrant, with another plant that had thorns and that was more like an orange. And thus we have this wonderful calamansi. What do you think is the most misunderstood aspect of Filipino food history? We often forget that history is not the study of only the past. History is ongoing. Each one of us, makes history every day. We just don't really think about it. So the study of food history is the study of changes, how we adopted, what we did so that we don't get hungry, other people don't get hungry, how we please our sense of flavor, how we try to enjoy our food. History is about yesterday, today, and how all of this affects tomorrow, which is why the sustainability cycle is very important in food. We need to understand that. It is having the supply, the food supply, making sure that everybody can have food. If it is true that we as Filipinos pride ourselves in pakikipagkapwa, we pride ourselves in cooking food, in serving others, We should not be satisfied with a society that does not have a way to stop hunger and malnutrition. What's one dish you hope will never be forgotten? I'm hoping that kinilaw will never disappear, simply because kinilaw is very likely a pre-colonial dish that has managed to survive all the competition. It's still around, and it has many variations. And I think it shows our strong link to our natural environment. It shows how we were able to learn to make souring agents. What do you think hinders Filipino cuisine to be recognized by many? How can we make Filipino food likable? Well, I think first of all, we need to understand how and why all these international cuisines that we think have become popular, how did they become popular? If we're thinking of the European and the American market, even the Australian market, what happened there? They had a lot of immigrants. The immigrants came and they brought their food with them. The longer they stayed, the more they wanted to produce the food of their homeland in their new homeland. Another way to make our food prominent is through tourism. When the soldiers, the American soldiers, went on R&R, for instance in Thailand, Thailand created a tourism program for the families of the American soldiers. So the American soldiers would invite their wives to come, and there was a package, like they could tour Bangkok, and they could eat. They figured they could package their food in such a way that these American military families would like it. And so, word of mouth. The visitor became the best ambassador for that foreign food. Philams are making waves overseas, and how are they doing it? Okay, this is another way. Combining foods from the homeland with foods from the new land. And so these Filipino foods are now becoming popular in the United States. See, there are many ways, many ways to do it. And those are just a few that I can cite. Nowadays, there's so much on social media about Philippine food that it's actually so much fun to see what other people are saying about Filipino food.
Let's make an endearing classic of Visayan cuisine. Tinoa is a product of a tuwa, a pre-colonial culinary technique which refers to cooking in a flavorful liquid, yielding a brothy dish. It is always cooked in tanglad and ginger, aromatics native to the location. There are two types of tinoa, tinuang manok with fowl and tinuang isda with fish.
Well, that one is by our friend, Rob. He's trying to show how tinola or tinoa can be cooked in his particular way with his choice of ingredients, because tinola is something we don't want to see disappear. It's really Visayan. In fact, it's very strange. The word tola, which means to boil in a liquid, appears in dictionaries of the 17th century, but the word does not appear in Tagalog dictionaries of the same era. I think Rob made an excellent choice, and actually when I see him cook, I get very hungry.
Durian or duryo ay kilala bilang king of fruits dahil sa kakaibang lasa, malaking sukat, at mabagsik na amoy nito.
Pero alam mo ba, bagay ang durian ngayong buwan ng pag-ibig?
Ang lasa ng durian ay isang kakaibang kombinasyon ng matamis at maasim na may natatanging amoy na umaakit sa ilang tao, habang iba naman ay nahihirapang maunawaan ang kanyang lasa.
Ako, gusto ko ang durian. No, seriously, I'm a durian fan. During the time of early missionaries, they used to receive in the Mindanao area a kind of sweet that was made for special occasions, and it used durian preserve. So that, I think, is something we need to revive because it's not being done anymore. But again, we have a date when we know people were eating it. There is an allure to knowing that what you're eating has some sense of, oldness or antiquity. I mean, it thrills me.
Ito ang pandesal at ito naman ang ensaymada, dalawang uri ng tinapay na talaga napakalapit sa ating mga Pilipino. Saan nagsimula ang pandesal at ensaymada? Ang pandesal ay Spanish words na ibig sabihin ay bread of salt. Dinala ng mga Kastila ito noong 16th century. Noong una ay talaga napakaalat nito dahil yun ang taste ng mga Kastila. Ngunit pagtagal ng panahon dahil tayo na ang gumagawa, nilagyan ng asukal at lumiit ng lumiit. Kaya ang pandesal ngayon ay napakatamis na. Ngunit ang unang ibig sabihin nito ay bread of salt o maalat na tinapay.
Talagang maalat ang unang pandesal. Alam mo kung bakit? The first pandesal in the Philippines wasn't bread. It was a measure of salt. So the pandesal was like a rock. So it looks like a bread bun. And the torta de sal was like a cake. So that's how the words first arrived in the Philippines. If one studies the history of bread, the term tinapay was there. It was used for religious purposes. Then we have pan being something that the Spanish wanted. They wanted their customary wheat bread. If you look at the records, it was still called only pan. Why is it that we get pandesal as a term for bread coming up only in the American era? 1911, there's a definition of what is pandesal. So there's a mystery in dating when pandesal as a measure of salt suddenly became pandesal, the bread. I see so many online posts, not only the ones that we've talked about earlier, but there's one that's very intriguing. I mean, speaking about mysteries, there was a post recently that got all of the historians sort of talking to each other because it claimed that there were bagoong revolts in the Philippines. The claim was that the Spanish didn't like the bagoong, and so they forbade Filipinos to eat bagoong. And so, of course, I got so many calls from friends, and I kept calling historians, and I said, have you come across evidence that the Spaniards forced us to stop eating bagoong? That's number one. And I said, secondly, have you ever come across anything about the Filipinos rising up against the Spanish because they didn't want us to eat bagoong? And so far, we haven't found any evidence, and I'm really hoping that whoever put that online will share with us the basis for that claim. Well, thank you for joining me at my table. I certainly hope that you had as much fun as I did answering all these questions. I look forward to seeing you again here at my table.